Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Pioca. Today is April 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank Sweeney's Pharmacy for hosting Finnegan's Wake readings once a week. That's where I met today's guest, Devin James Cameron. Where in the heck you calling in from, Devin?
I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Oh, we're just jumping right into it, eh? I guess pleasure with noble intent.
Oh, that is good. Pleasure with noble intent. I never get that answer. That's beautiful. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
I think this is also a little bit esoteric, but through something in front of me rather than secondary, right? I like to be there where the information is generating.
That is good. Again, very concise and articulate. I thank you. I sometimes people call well, anyways, that's good. In front of me. That's good. Okay. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think everyone's just trying to make sense of it, right? You know, the bigger picture and the more little pieces we can get and try to categorize. I think the closer we feel we come to that.
Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's the desire, the drive is innate, but the implications of it are invented.
Yeah. Good distinguishing. Do thoughts create emotions?
I think so. Maybe they don't create them, but they definitely inspire them. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good. I'm for anyone changing the wording on my questions, tangents, stories, anecdotes. Really good. Change the verb to inspire rather than create. So, Devin, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I don't know what I think until I get out of bed. Until I have my coffee.
Very good. Can humans think without language?
No, I don't think so. Not in the way that, funny enough, that we think of it. You know, I think it's without language, it's more uh, stimulus response, right? Without a way to contextualize it.
Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do
Yeah.
you do? What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
So yeah, I guess I took kind of a narrow view of that. You know, Chomsky a little bit more enlightened. When language breaks down, I guess you fall back on the more base stuff, huh? I think that's how a lot of bad blood and fights and things start. You know, because we lose that more complex interaction.
Well, what just suss out what does base stuff mean? You fall back on base stuff. What's that
Well,
mean?
you know, when language, which is our way of kind of connecting with community and talking to each other, when that fails us, I think we go back to, you know, the more primal side of us without such a complex language. So I guess the animal instinct, and I think that's why people get in fist fights outside of bars, right?
Yeah. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Hmm. That's a good one. I think probably more feeling. I think it drives more of us at the more basic level, right? It's kind of like Freud, like the id and the ego and the superego, right?
Yeah, that's interesting because most people answer, I think we're more feeling beings. But
Right.
Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. And I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? Or, people who meditate go, now think about not thinking. And
Yeah.
there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street that says, don't believe everything you think. And it could say, don't believe everything you feel.
Or don't feel everything you think. Right. I,
Really? Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me, I think we're always unconsciously feeling, and we're always unconsciously thinking too. But the weird part is, the feeling is always happening when you're thinking about thinking. Like, I don't know. I know that's kind of weird, but it's less of a baseline to me.
Yeah. No, it's good. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One is thinking a function of the soul.
Yeah, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that one. I'll leave that to Mr. Turing. Matters of the soul. It's a little outside my domain.
The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Oh, yeah, that one's even tougher, right? Maybe not at the moment, but I think sometime in the future, it'll be even harder to answer that question. Yeah, I work in software, so I deal with a lot of the new stuff every day, and it's scary. It's scary sometimes.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I don't really see a huge difference sometimes, honestly. Happiness to me, like I started with, is kind of part of the meaning,
Yeah.
and I find meaning in finding happiness. So.
Well, I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last and meaning does tend to last. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll wrap it back around as if you find happiness in meaning, you've kind of cheated it, right? You have a way to make it last, just by having experienced it.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I think there's kind of this is going to sound a little out there, but to me, there's a constant note of consciousness that the universe wants to project in some form. And our brain is kind of the antenna that
Yeah.
catches that wave. That's the way I look at it. And,
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
oh, man. I like to say thought, but that's probably just ego. you know,
No,
probably.
no, Devin, people who answer thought, I go, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. So Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools.
Sure.
Her colleague Yvonne Rainer said, oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Maybe a sense of nuance, and the people who built the house are very well aware of all the different, like you said, the tools and each different flavor of tool and each different application. And I think us who are trapped within the house love to take simple answers and project them, instead of appreciating just how much detail there is.
Dude, you're really concise and articulate. I want to go back to that word. No one's ever said that the new tool would be a sense of nuance. Tell me what's a word that you could explain nuance with. Suss it out with one word and then suss it out with several words. What does nuance mean to you in that word, in that sense? A sense of nuance.
The ability to accept and understand that each situation is unique and is going to have different properties. We
Yeah.
want to have simple answers to things.
Yeah.
That's kind of being a little basic with it, but
No, that really sussed it out. Yeah. That's okay. So what new toy do you suggest?
what do you mean?
Well, the same when I ask people all these questions and I say, what toy, what tool do they gravitate towards? One guy said, well, what about a toy? So then I just started asking, well, what new toy do you suggest? So, again, you put it in the context you want. What toy do you most gravitate towards, or in any context you want?
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be tangible.
Yeah.
Sense of nuance isn't a tool you can hold in your hand per se. So same with a toy. It could be something you hold in your hand, or it could be non-tangible.
I think some kind of marionette. I spend a lot of my life feeling like I'm the puppet, so it'd be nice to have something to kind of pull the strings to.
That is classic.
Yeah.
You're really unique, dude. You've like answered 80% of these questions without what all these other people have said. So really good, Devin. Thank you. Okay. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Everything. Yeah. Lately, work mostly. It's when I'm out of work, it's more the cosmic stuff, and then when I'm employed, it feels more grounded. So
Yeah.
that's nice.
McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions.
Yeah.
So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Devin, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I think artists are both uniquely equipped to pick up on those messages, but also maybe uniquely equipped to handle the fallout of tuning into that, right? I think most people it would make real sick if they really paid attention. And probably makes a lot of artists real sick.
Man, media fallout. You got all my catchphrases.
Yeah.
Yeah, media. Okay, so do artists have moral obligation?
No, I think they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. you know? Yeah, no, I don't know if it's obligation. I think they're able to, and for better or for worse, they do.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Well, the old ideas have gotten us this far, again, for better or for worse. So, I think about a couple, 10,000 years of human history we've got here. And then in the past century, just AI and the atom bomb. I think I've come pretty close to ending the program. So it's tough.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Going back. I remember I was probably 4 and maybe it must have been kindergarten or preschool, and me and another boy had the brilliant idea of how can we punch each other at the same time? So we extended the opposite fist and ran at each other. And our teacher was like, "Why do you guys have opposite black eyes?" So that's one of the first ones that comes up.
That is funny.
Yeah, ingenuity, right?
Engineer, are you Irish?
I'm Scottish. Scottish.
Scottish. You know, the joke I've learned from studying Finnegan's Wake is this a private fight or can anyone join in?
Right. Yeah, that's funny.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's everything, right? I think it's a blessing. I spend a lot of time thinking about, a lot of people and a lot of my peers in the social groups that I'm in, they kind of fold into the, we're all part of nature. Like what a miracle it is that we are part of this background noise. And I've always kind of taken the opposite and no, like thank God that we're not part of the void. Like thank God I can think and talk to you and have this conversation. And I think memory is the entire basis of that.
Amazing. Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact? Kind of like a role model.
Yeah, no, it's got to be my mom. My parents were never married, and my dad and I have kind of had an on and off, but he wasn't really a huge part of my childhood. And my mom, never finished high school, so it was just the uphill struggle that I could recognize as a kid, but looking back at now, just seeing the sacrifice that she made, against everything, just trying to throw her off, and getting me and the rest of her family this far. And I think about her a lot. Yeah.
Same question, Devin. Outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
Yeah. There's a lot. I've met a lot of people. I was just thinking the other day. I wrote my undergraduate capstone with my I have a degree in English and I have a degree in communication. And the professor I worked with to do my thesis, that was a 2-year process, and I've never had somebody kind of take such a grasp on, I don't want to sound hubristic here, but kind of my academic career, my intellectual career, and try and pull that out and nurture it. And yeah, I think it really changed the way that I think about, education in general.
What college was that?
It's you might know Oakland University.
Oh,
It's in
yeah.
Rochester Hills, Michigan. Yeah.
I actually lectured there once.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So, did did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Uh, so not really. I knew that nominally they were Christian. My stepdad comes from a Baptist family, but it was very much this is what we believe, but we trust you to do what's right for you kind of household, which I appreciate a lot.
Do you pray?
No, not currently.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
You had a hell of a run. Just like a high five would be great.
A high five. That's one thing you can do on Zoom is high five. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think very, very few people consciously make evil decisions in the acceptance, and if they really believe what they're doing is evil, I think very few people choose that. So I think it manifests in another way and kind of grabs the marionette, so to speak.
Yeah. The question, Devin, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Few thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah, I mean, it's in regards to Watts, you kind of, just by speaking the name of something, you bring it into the world in a more tangible way than it was before. So I think he's right. Just by giving them the time and the light, you're giving them more than they had before, which maybe it's not great if they're your enemy. As far as how you deal with an enemy, my philosophy is, no matter if somebody is worse off than you, we always talk about, you have to have empathy for the poor, have sympathy with the poor, and that's great. But I also try to have empathy for people, even people who have it much better than I do, because like I said, fundamentally, I think most people are making in their head the moral decision. Maybe that's kind of a grasp at straws. So I think that's how you deal with an enemy, is give them that nuance and that accepting that, probably from their point of view, they're not, they're not existing to be your enemy, right?
Yeah. It's good because I always say, dealing with people who are trustafarians or rich, spoiled rich brats, whatever you want to call them. It's not their fault. It's
Right.
not their fault they're rich, and you know that you deal with it. So empathy for the poor and the rich was really good. Where did you learn that, on your own or from the way your mom raised you?
Well, I think I kind of synthesized it into words on my own, but the sensitivity of it, I think, came a lot from my upbringing. Yeah.
Yeah. Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said villains don't think they're bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson said if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want, but the question is, does punishment work?
I don't think there's a one size fits all for that. I think, when a kid gets slapped on the hand because he's caught stealing a cookie, I think he eats both. Man, I wish I was better at stealing cookies, but also you don't want somebody, you're participating in a system that you don't want disappointed in you. So I think
Yeah.
it's everybody has a different line, right? And it's not possible for say the incarceration system to find that line for everyone. It's too much.
It's comprehensive, dude. You're really getting that's Pascal said in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between.
Yeah.
You know, usually we that's McLuhan's main thing is understanding is not having a point of view, getting the big picture. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I'm gonna have maybe a different perspective on that because, like I said earlier, my preference is always to live when you can, where things are happening and see them. But they take on. It's like seasoning, right? You can pull a potato out of the ground, but it takes a cook to make you want to eat it again and again. And I think that the people who transform real life into these images are the cooks, right? They're the ones preparing it in a way that makes it more enticing.
Yeah, it's a really good metaphor, dude. So walk us through your career a little, Devin. You're in high school. Are you reading? And then are you reading a lot and getting attracted to literature and go, okay, that's my calling? Or then where did you switch to go to being, a software developer? So those two tipping points to pursue literature and to pursue software developing.
Yeah, so it's in high school. I don't know. I was a book kid growing up, right? But I wasn't academically into it. Going into college, I actually started as a computer science major, and then they hit me with a calculus class, and I was like, "This isn't gonna work." And no, embarrassingly enough, I switched over to English because a girl that I was interested in at the time, and that stuck with me a lot longer than the girl did. So
So, but you were reading what that was making you, pursue literature besides that
yeah,
motive? Was there any authors or books that were standing out that like, oh, or poets?
I think the first one that really got its claws into me was Hemingway. Going into my freshman year of college, that really kind of sucked me in. We did a class on a lot of his short stories, and I'd never been involved in literature from that deep of an academic side before. And once I kind of got into it, I knew that was for me.
Yeah. And then what kicked you over into software developing? Where was that tipping point?
Well, I came out of college and I needed health insurance for an operation, and I had a friend who worked in software, and nepotism got me into that. So,
Yeah.
but it was kind of reluctant It's kind of a matter of necessity at that point.
Yeah. And you said you write poetry. Is that actively or not so much?
Well, when I'm unemployed, I write a lot of poetry, and then when I'm employed, I write maybe one every couple of months. So
So that's pretty active. So let's go into that in these couple questions.
sure.
A screenwriting teacher told me great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a poem?
Um, you know, for me, writing poems is more of a feeling than a process, and I don't know. I don't know if maybe I'm more of a Kubrick on that side, where I'm like, probably some of this is going to get lost in the mix, and I know that, but because of what it means to me, that's where I'm going to get the importance of it from.
Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
I want to be entertaining, and I think that the ones that make it out there are enjoyable and people do like them. I don't have a wide audience currently, but part of that's intentional, right? I'm waiting for the right moment to kind of break back into that.
McLuhan also says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth, shutter in a camera or a film projector extends our eyelid, and maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard, what humanness does it extend?
I think I mean, we can take it back to Joyce for a second and say, Ulysses in particular to me is about showing just how much unique consciousness is in each one of us. And for me, art and the pencil is about that. It's about displaying what's going on inside of you that would never be apparent from just seeing you or just talking to you even.
It's really good. And the same question, Devin, in regards to software. What humanness does software extend?
Yeah, that's a question I deal with every day. I write a lot of user experience, like front end interfaces and things like that. And when I design stuff, I try to have as much empathy for the user as I can. If I had to use this, so I like to kind of think of it as a handshake. Like I'm trying to help you and make this easier for you. And I think there's opportunity for that in something even as mundane as software.
Yeah. It's like tactility. It's really amazing just to say handshake. Software extends the handshake.
Right.
That is it.
We're
You
all
could get you should get a raise for saying, your
we'll
boss
forward this to them. Yeah. Right.
So tell us I want to go into poetry, but let's do Joyce first.
Sure.
Let's tell me your history with Joyce. When you end up at Sweeney's reading Finnegan's Wake,
Yeah.
with a group of people. And did you know you were walking in there to read Finnegan's Wake, or are you just going there because it's a tourist trap?
Well, I'll start a little bit earlier. So my capstone English project was on Moby Dick. I got this tattoo on my arm from Moby Dick.
Yeah.
From Hell's Heart, I stab at thee. And from there, I kind of fell in love with the term, the encyclopedic novel.
Yeah.
It's like a novel that is just, really just takes a lot of work to understand and get through. And I like that kind of puzzly challenge. So I started with Moby Dick. Over COVID, at some point I read Infinite Jest, and then naturally I found Ulysses. And I spent probably a year getting through it and reading it and really soaking it in. And I said, what the hell? I have a week of vacation. I'll go. And I did, most of the places you can go. That was really the biggest reason I went to Dublin. And I went into Sweeney's earlier that day that we met. And his name escapes me. He was running the shop at the time, and he invited me back that evening. He said, "Hey, we're going to read Finnegan's Wake," which I knew of course, but I never tried to crack into. And I think most tourists would have been like, no, I'm going to go do anything other than come to the book reading. But for me, I was like, yeah, I'll be here, man. And,
So you mean you read Moby Dick, Infinite Jest, and then did you read Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake? Yeah.
Ulysses,
Then
yeah.
in Ulysses you read on your own, not as a college project.
Right.
On own, yeah. And so then you read Finnegan's Wake that day at Sweeney's. And did you ever return to it? Is that it? You just read it that one time?
Yeah, I mean that's the only time I've really, been in the text. It's on my ever-growing list of things I want to
Yeah.
tackle. So
But
someday.
I would recommend reading it out loud with a group of people. And there's 50 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs, and they're all over the world.
Yeah,
And
I
most of
really
them,
enjoyed that. Yeah,
yeah, most of them are on Zoom.
sure.
And so you can find one that you can do it with a group of people. But you tackled Ulysses. You really never read any of the other Joyce before Ulysses?
No, I just kind of, and maybe that was a mistake. Like I said, I wanted something that was a bit of a challenge, and that was what
Yeah.
was recommended to me. So
No, I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I'm just curious because I mean I just dove into the Wake 30 years ago and I didn't really read any other Joyce, and now I try to read Ulysses with a group and it just doesn't satisfy me as much as the Wake. But to each
yeah,
their own. I mean, would you get out, just an aside, what'd you get out of reading Infinite Jest? Good experience, not so healthy? What's your basic reaction to that?
I found Infinite Jest, say, versus Ulysses to be less insightful, but maybe more entertaining. You know what I mean?
Right. And was Moby Dick the same?
Moby Dick was more scary than anything.
More scary. That's good. So
Yeah.
that means you liked being scared or you didn't like it.
They're three very very different books, and the emotions they conjured in me were as far apart as you could hope for. So yeah,
So what's your next step in encyclopedic novels?
right now
Moby Dick, Infinite Jest, Ulysses. What would be 4, 5, and 6? Any ones you got on your
yeah,
upcoming?
right now I'm doing Gravity's Rainbow
Oh,
by,
good.
Pynchon, and yeah, a little bit into it, not terrifically far
Yeah,
just yet. And then next up will be Blood Meridian by McCarthy.
very good. You're smart. Okay, so this is Joyce in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I will try to express myself in some mode or of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning. Yeah, you don't even have to put in the context he's doing it in the book. Basically, I'm just asking you, what is your hunch Joyce is referring to silence, exile, and cunning? Just knowing those words. And it's funny because I think that's the perfect example where McLuhan got that extension thing. He actually got it from somebody like Walt Whitman, but how humans extend our humanness with our inventions. And he says, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use. And then the arms he's referring to are silence, exile, and cunning.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on those three words? What do they mean to you?
Well, I think it goes back to a little earlier when we talked about, even by speaking your enemy's name, you're giving it power, and maybe Joyce was onto that, and that's why silence comes first. Exile, willingly leaving the place that is kind of manifesting that evil towards you. If it does exist to pester you, by not being in its realm, you've kind of defused it. So I think he's spot on.
Yeah. And then what about cunning?
I mean, you don't have the first two without a little bit of cunning, I think. So you can outsmart them just by leaving them alone, right?
Yeah. That's like going back to how do you deal with an enemy, these younger folks came to my reading club. They were like 16 and 18, and they took judo and jujitsu. And they said, hey, the best warrior doesn't even fight the fight. They know how to avoid even having
Yeah,
the
right.
con, you know. So that could be cutting. So here's another phrase that's well, it will work. It will work better if I do it set it up like this. Louis Buñuel says, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." Now, most people go, "Oh, that's cool. I like that." And one guy goes, "No, that's bullshit." Because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So I morphed it into this question. You can refer to Buñuel's quote if you want, but I morphed it into the question. The cliche goes, the journey is more important than the destination. If the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name or seek a destination?
Yeah, see, I don't know if I, obviously that's the cliche, and I don't know if I've really given it a lot of thought until right now, but maybe the destination should be given more credit than we think, than we tend to give it. And because I think about, nobody wants to declare the destination for everyone, just like nobody wants to. Well, a lot of people want to declare the truth for everyone, but nobody can do it convincingly. But without having some kind of psychological anchor at the end of the road, your journey, it becomes kind of washy sometimes, I think.
Well, it's perfect, Devin, because it leads into this. That's what the people in Paris did in the 20s. Your man, Hemingway, Duchamp, Joyce, they were all just slack off and drink coffee at the cafe. And what Joyce said, you'll have an epiphany in everydayness.
Sure, sure.
So what is your thoughts? And that's what flaneur is, psychogeography. But what is your thoughts on what Joyce might have been referring to when he said an epiphany in everydayness? I mean, it's almost like, is it the same thing you said right off the bat? What's in front of me? What's an epiphany in everydayness mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's that once in a while we have this cosmic leap of understanding of the beauty and intricacy of the mundane, right? And for some people, it happens sitting in a coffee shop. For me, it's happened sitting in a park, and
Yeah.
a lot of people get caught up into I have to do this transcendental thing to reach some inspiration, and I think probably that's not necessary some of the time.
This is Richard Ellman. Now, I'm from Michigan. Were you raised in Michigan?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I was raised in Flint. What town were you raised in?
Actually, I grew up. You must know Imlay City in K-Pac. Do you know around
Yeah,
there? Yeah, that's
cool.
where I grew up. So
So Richard Ellman, who's the foremost kind of expert on James Joyce, was raised in Michigan too.
really,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, and he said we are learning to be Joyce's contemporaries. So that's an interesting thought because it could go either way. I mean, it could be interpreted different ways.
Sure.
By reading Joyce, are we being put into his time space? Like when you read Moby Dick, are you reading and being put into Hemingway's time when they went and did that to whales and were sailors and that whole world? So is it time travel, or is it learning to be Joyce's contemporaries? Is Joyce and Frank Zappa both said all times are happening now. That means this all at onceness.
Hmm.
So, any thoughts on that? We're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries. Do you lean towards both of them or a little towards one or the other or something else?
Well, I think it's about, like we said really early on, about putting that big picture together and getting the pieces together and trying to make sense. So I lean towards, like I said, Zappa's idea of it's all happening right now. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen 200 years ago or 100 years ago in Dublin, right?
Yeah.
Part of that is being able to kind of pick up on their antennas as they happened when they did, and where they did. Kind of helps you fill in the timeline for yourself.
Wow. That was good. Fill in the timeline. So let's go into poetry. What's the function of poetry?
I think, yeah, it's another part of that scramble for meaning and, expressing the meaning that you're able to find.
Yeah. This is actually a scientist, because I want to talk to you about the difference between art and science. Niels Bohr, he said, we must be clear that when it comes to atoms, language can be used only as in poetry.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. It's sort of breaking down what is the building blocks of poetry. We must be clear that when it comes to atoms, language can be used only as it is in poetry.
Yeah, I'd have to work on that one, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's a couple other people on the function of poetry.
Sure.
Rexroth said poetry is to subvert the bourgeois and woo your lover.
I mean, that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how many girls I've really wooed with my poetry, but I've tried.
Here's another guy, Muriel Kiesker. Art creates meeting places. Poetry creates democracy.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think poetry and even prose to an extent are very democratic forms of art. If you know a language, you can write a poem. And anybody who's literate can at least put something together. I mean, I guess anybody can draw a picture, but I think it's more accessible to distill meaning into a haiku than it is into a watercolor. And maybe I'm way off base there, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. And one more is, well, there's two more in poetry I'd love to get your thoughts on. Is Gary Snyder said, the task of the poet is to see the world without language, then put that seeing into language.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think I don't have any criticism of that.
And then one more is Leo Bersani. He commented on Mallarmé, the symbolist poet. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Yeah, right. I think that's good too. I mean, we're all we're like a dog chasing our tails. I think poets is we wouldn't know what to do if we caught it.
Yeah, that's good. We don't know what to do if we caught. Okay, so what's the difference between science and art?
I think if art is that antenna that's trying to catch these esoteric broadcasts, science is the numbers that made the transmission possible.
Yeah. Few more on science and art. That was good. Jean Cocteau, art is science made clear.
Yeah, I don't know. I think of them, I think more distinctly than that. Science is maybe, it's like the bare metal under like the clear coat and the paint.
Yeah.
So
And
maybe,
you're saying, yeah, you're saying the paint is art and the science is what they're painted onto, the bare metal.
Other people might reverse it, but maybe I'm old-fashioned in that sense.
Yeah. Well, here's McLuhan. When you push back our paradigms, and when you push our paradigms back, we get history. when you push them forward, we get science.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe the difference is, like I said, if a poet caught his own tail, like got to what he's trying to get to, he wouldn't know what to do. But a scientist, there's always a goal, right? Like a very clear thought. This is what we're trying to accomplish here, and that's maybe the biggest difference.
Well, that's this French historian said science finds no truths. It discovers unknown facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways.
Yeah, maybe I'm grasping at straws, but I hope for my own sanity that there's some, even if I'm not aware of it, some level of objectivity in the universe. You know?
Yeah. But that's the truth questions I ask, gets a little quantum entanglement here.
Sure.
This is Shelby Foote. A fact is not a truth until you love it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. You know, it goes back to your personal truth, right?
Yeah.
You interpret the facts. You know, the fact remains the same, but to everyone around it, it's a different truth, right?
Yeah.
You know.
What Chomsky says, we learn more about ourselves from literature than from science.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I think very few people will care how many cells compose their body, you know, but a lot of people will care, you know, the lesson they learned from a book, or, you know, even just a bit of dialogue in their favorite book. Right? That's going to mean a lot more to them than, you know, anything that science could tell them.
Amazing. Yeah. Because here's one of my favorites is McLuhan said, and you talked about it earlier, he wrote a book called Interior Landscape. That's sort of inner as opposed to the outer, whether it's Freudian subconscious id, super id, whatever.
Sure.
He said, for James Joyce has solved numerous problems which science has not formulated as problems.
Yeah, no, I mean, the way I've always kind of looked at it is, I don't know if you're familiar at all with Isaac Asimov.
Yes, please.
He's got a short story called The Last Question, and they built a supercomputer that at the end, you know, they're just the one answer they need out of it from science is how do we reverse entropy? And, you know, for millions of years they're trying to get this computer, please, you know, how do we stop this? And I always kind of flipped it the other way. If that computer could have one question to humans that we couldn't answer, you know, maybe it's like going back to earlier, what is the difference between good and evil?
Yeah.
You know, like we can spend a million years trying to sort that out. Well, you work on the entropy, and we'll see if we can come up with something.
Yeah, that reminds me of the guy goes to his guru and he says, "What's the best question I can ask you?"
Yeah.
And the guru goes, "The one you just asked me."
Right. Yeah.
Well, another one is religion without science is blind. Science without religion is lame.
Yeah, I mean, not only lame, but maybe kind of scary because you like to think the people manipulating atoms and creating, you know, black holes have some kind of moral consciousness. You know, we don't want machines doing the science. I think right now we might not like the answers if they don't have any humanity in them.
That's good. You know who said that? Albert Einstein. But here's one of my favorite Einsteins. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science.
Yeah. I last year we went and saw we went down to Indiana for the eclipse, and I'd never seen a total eclipse like that. And not a lot of things take the breath out of my lungs anymore. And all I could think, you know, while I'm watching this is, if I didn't have the rational basis to understand, like, this is temporary, you know, this would be a religious experience. It kind of still was, you know, to be honest with you. And
Wow.
yeah, and that makes me think of that.
But that's how we equate the mystery with religion, because Mystery is also like not knowing. So
Right.
you're a smart dude. You know, you've learned a lot from Hemingway and all these great writers. Then how do you unlearn what you learned from them?
Oh man, with or without chemical help. um, I don't know. I think being conscious of that pollution of science, right? You know, as much
Yeah,
as we need it, you know, you have to have your internal landscape too, and you have to be able to kind of separate it.
yeah. Well, this is going into art now a little. Your comments on this artist said, art is making your problems other people's problems.
Yeah, but that's kind of the, you know, you can't, as long as you are a member of society, willing or not, other people's problems are going to spill into your life. So it might as well be done in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, who said that? One of the greatest artists raised in Michigan, Mike Kelly. He said, art is making your problems other people's problems. Some people go, well, art is making your joy other people's joy. So it could be either way. But, you know, when Mike died, the obituary in the New York Times, one of my favorite comments, because I knew him, I went to Ann Arbor, University of Michigan with him. He's an amazing artist, but one of the critics said his art made me feel soiled.
No, it's that's kind of the fun of it, right? Like you shouldn't come out of every art or media experience feeling good. I think
Yeah.
it's going to
But
challenge you in ways that the regular course of your life would never throw at you, right?
yeah. Well, being from Michigan, have you ever seen Mike Kelly's art?
No, I can't say I'm familiar.
Okay, look it up at some point because
I
it's
will.
really it's sort of devastating in a way, but it's very interesting. Okay, here's a poet, Fanny Howe. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Hmm. That's another one I think I'd have to chew on for a while.
Yeah, that one I never get. I can't understand it, but I think it's intriguing.
Yeah.
Well, this is Milan Kundera. Have you ever read Unbearable Likeness of Being?
No, I can't say I have.
You might want to check him out too. He said, this is why I love writing, because the character that I'm writing about can go further than I can. And it's like, yeah, right. That sounds really romantic. I'm going to take this pencil and write a character on some paper. How can it go further than I can?
Yeah. A lot of people, I think, oh, it's kind of reaching out to try and fill in those gaps, you know, in your own mind, maybe, right? It's a little self-aggrandizing, but I don't think it's totally wrong.
Yeah. Because there's a poet critic, a critic of poetry, Helen Vendler. She just died last year. She says, I write to explain things to myself.
Yeah, no, that I find that resonates with me a lot, you know, and
Yeah.
sometimes it takes that. How can I distill this in a way that it would make sense to other people to even get it to make sense to you?
Yeah.
You know?
And then Steve Martin loves to quote David Mamet. Art is a product of the unconscious mind. Now, I felt, you know, for the last hour, we're both here consciously, pretty much like 80 to 100%. George Lakoff, you know, linguist, says, oh, we operate 80% unconsciously. I'm like, what? So, how do you process that line? Art is a product of the unconscious mind.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes making art kind of feels like dreaming, right? And
Yeah.
you're just pulling things out that maybe you weren't aware of, for better or for worse, before you pulled it out of the hat. And it's kind of a dark reminder sometimes of how much is going on without, you know, being front and center.
It's really good because Breck asked Charles Lawton, the actor, why do you act? And he says, because people don't know what they are like, and I think I can show them. Now, that one guy said the other day, he had a huge ego. I mean, Charles Lawton was a great actor, but is that, you know, part of this motive when you write a poem or you create art or you even write software, you have some conscious attempt to show people something in particular. So it's sort of like when I talk to musicians, I say that my friend says the three T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. You learn how to play the instrument, you know the structure, the theory. How does one acquire taste?
Mm.
Like how'd you gravitate towards Hemingway instead of, somebody else?
I think I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's best if no one ever does. I
That's
think we should not know that, right?
But Devin, you know what 80% of people say. How do you acquire taste? They go, experience, exposure. And I go, well, that's fine, but it seems it is something deeper because
Yeah,
taste implies gut,
right.
something inside your stomach. And now there's all that theory, talk about art meets science. There's all that theory about how we think through our stomachs, that
Hmm.
the gut is involved in your stomach. So here's another one in that regard. Igor Stravinsky. Most people don't know what they like what they know.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to conflate liking with comfort, right? Like, there's a lot of foods that I'm comfortable with that I wouldn't say I like, but I'll. It's a different emotion than pleasure. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. So you brought this up earlier and I'm really curious. This is 1957. McLuhan says, it's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Now, I'm basically trying to get you to talk about the difference between entertainment and art. I mean, entertainment and education, and this line, whatever pleases teaches more effectively. And I have to inject one guy, most people just go off and talk about it fine. One guy goes, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. So, so it's interesting. It took many times asking this question before someone grabbed onto the flip of it. But your take, what's the difference between education and entertainment in this line, whatever pleases teaches more effectively?
Well, first, let me tackle the counterpoint and to say, whatever displeases teaches. We have to think teaching. I think immediately we think of like a classroom and children. As I get older, I think the more displeasurable things in my life maybe make a more lasting impression. Maybe they don't teach me more, but I definitely remember them more clearly. Now, as far as entertainment and education, yeah, I think the Western mindset, especially when it comes to education and priming kids for adulthood, is we're so hell bent on not having curious people, right? We like to suppress that curiosity and that kind of self-guidedness. And of course, learning about, the mitochondria isn't going to be exciting to kids who aren't curious and aren't allowed to be curious, right? So I think that's spot on. Education and entertainment don't have to be separate worlds.
Yeah. I spoke with Michael Apted, the movie director, 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it flourished in the 80s with MTV to
Sure.
the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Well,
Mhm.
Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. And I asked this with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster? Or we just brainwashed to believe we can.
I don't know if we have found a way to take in information faster as much as we have found ways to optimize the information,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I don't know, not always a good thing.
It's a great word, but give me another word. What is optimize information? What's another explanation for optimize?
So we found ways to cut the fat, the things that we would call less important off of the information.
Yeah,
Like I said, that's maybe a net loss on our part.
that's called power browsing. Like
Yeah,
when we used to look up in the encyclopedia something, then we'd go to the footnotes and explore. Now I just go blah blah blah, and it goes choo, 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 choo. It goes right. Just the matter of putting the quotes in the right words. Okay, very good. Is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
not well, not without dropping something. And yeah, you can do any number of things. It's a matter of if you want to do it functionally. So,
What's your hunch or guess? What was the motive of the cave artist?
uh, I would guess boredom.
Yeah, that's amazing word because Australian Aborigines have no word for boredom. It's like, well, do they not get bored? No, they probably get bored, but they just call it something different.
Yeah,
It's a different concept.
a healthier response to it.
Yeah. Devin, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Mm, I think compromise, honestly.
Yeah. Again, there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right.
I'm a negotiator at heart, so
That is good. You in your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
luck's got to be first, And I have a lot of younger siblings, and anybody I find myself in kind of a mentor capacity to, I tell them, sometimes out of pure chance, life is going to line things up for you, and you have to be ready to strike. You have to
Yeah.
grab it. So luck, I think, first. The others were ambition and what was the third
Skill.
one? Skill. Probably skill came second.
Yeah.
My life is some it has its ambitious periods, and then probably more frequently it has the unambitious periods. So
T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
uh, it's uh, it's a lot louder than my outer dialogue, at least.
Louder. That is good. Two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas, there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Romantically, I like to think it's the former.
Yeah.
Because I like to, think of it as a mostly individual process, but in real life, it's probably more the latter. I think.
Can art making be egoless?
I hope not. I don't think so. I mean, there's always going to be, anything that's made by a person has a bit of that person in it, I think.
Yeah. Is perception reality?
It's as close as we're going to come, I think. So it might as well be.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, I think people are fundamentally not wanting to be evil, and maybe that's me believing an impossible thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's funny because I wrote an essay called Can Art Stop War? And it's based in Maria Gimbutas and Rian Eisler saying we're more hardwired for cooperation than we are for violence. Most people go, well, no, we're hardwired to fight, and it's like, that right there brainwashes you off the bat. So very interesting. So tell me one major element of your Devinness, like who you are, what you create, that stayed the same, and one major element that's changed.
I think in the life that I've led and the places that I've lived and kind of how I grew up, I've always kind of been a bit of a black sheep and kind of for lack of a better term, a weird dude, right? And a cloud of weirdness has kind of followed me. And I think that would be trying to bridge that gap between, the strange and the, what we consider the mainstream. That's the constant current. And things that changed is I've become a lot more humble in the past probably 10 years or so. I used to approach it as this difference makes me better, and now it's more like this difference makes me different.
Beautiful. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness.
Yeah.
Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I mean, it came from, I think, when I first started fiction writing or poetry writing, is that coming out of an environment that didn't really have a structure to it into, academia, and kind of having to deal with criticism of people that I respected and thought were very talented. It's very harsh the first time you're kind of put up against that, when you haven't had it before, and just kind of learning to sublimate others' negativity, not as a personal hit against you, but as an opportunity to, more effectively communicate with them.
That is brilliant, dude. Jean Cocteau nailed exactly what you said in a way. He said, when you make your first piece of art or write your first poem or whatever, and your family and your friends and your teachers are analyzing it and they go, Devin, you did really good, but whatever they criticize you on, take that and exploit it the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely right.
But that's like Harold Bloom saying, how do you absorb your influences, then abandon them? So, you just don't become a clone of who your teachers and who you admire are.
Right.
You absorb it. Then how do you like filter it out? That's really hard, I think.
No, it is. It is for sure.
In fact, it's sort of like the term anarchy. Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. And so the basic question is, what does freedom mean to you now? Because freedom etymologically is the same thing, giving oneself one's own laws.
Yeah, I mean, pardon me. Excuse me. I think that's true. The idealist anarchist believes that everybody is capable of governing themselves in a moral framework that is agreeable to them, and I don't know if I buy that, but I think the concept is sound.
But when Utah says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people, who's entitled to make the rules?
Yeah, and that's what I think. The fantasy is that they're all entitled to make the rules, and everybody hopes that other people's rules will be compatible with their own.
Yeah.
Which isn't often the case, I think.
Fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when
it drives you to do better. I know that's kind of cliche.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good bit.
No, McLuhan has a great book, From Cliche to Archetype. I mean, that's again flipping it into, well, that's what we're here for, to make the world a better place. I mean, that's evident.
Right.
So I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can satire be destructive? And he says, that's the job of satire. But if me or you do a cartoon in another country and they kill us, some people think dying is destructive. Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. What's the function of satire?
Yeah, so I actually, that's what I wrote my thesis on that I mentioned with my mentor was, kind of satire and spoof. And I think the function of it is to it's kind of like distilling truth in a way that is entertaining. Satire is a way to make the hardest education the most entertaining.
Yeah. It's good. What's the function of laughter?
Oh, I don't know. Function of laughter. It lets other people know that we're learning, right?
Wow, that's heavy. My friend taught me when you're learning, when you're laughing, you're learning. And Gurdjieff said a good one. He says, laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no.
Yeah.
But here's McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen: behind every joke, there's a grievance. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of comedy, satire, anything of that vein, it's another way. With poetry, we try to do it in a beautiful and profound way, and with satire, you try to do it in a funny way, right?
Yeah.
It's different ways of expressing that in a way that other people can understand and appreciate.
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
I've always, and this, I don't want anybody to this is just my cosmic perception, is that men are very destructive and very buildy, create, destroy, whereas women, I think fundamentally are more nurturing. They
Yeah.
want to make sure things are okay. They're not hell-bent on just putting their own image in place.
Yeah. That's good. Hollis Frampton's great experimental filmmaker said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
No, I don't think so. Maybe I'm kind of anti-romantic on that. There's a line in the poem by one of my favorite poets. His name is Henry Cole, and it just reads, "Dead is dead," and I think that's more me. It's kind of do with what you have right now, because
Yeah.
someday you won't have it.
Is Henry Cole?
Yeah, Henri, and then Cole, right?
Very good. Thank you. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So basically, what's your take on this line? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Devin, like one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we're all running from something, right? And we all have these type characters and events and situations in our head that we never want to be associated with. But just like politics, the more schemes and tools you develop to suppress that, those tools are still there once you've solved that problem, and they find a way to come back around.
Yeah. Devin, we got about 15 more minutes. It's really been fun. I appreciate your time here. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
Man, who started it all? I don't know, but I'd like to ask him a few questions.
But did you notice, all these cosmic people like Alan Watts and Allen Ginsberg, they say first thought is best thought. If you listen really closely, I says, who started it all? And you went, man. Like isn't that cosmic? It's sort of like, oh, well, it's funny. Okay, the second one is, are we going to make it?
Yeah, I think so.
3, where do we put it?
Wherever there's room.
4, who's cleaning it up?
Not me.
5, is it serious?
Both more and less than we like it to be.
Very good. Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious.
Yeah, no, I'm that whole vein of kind of unserious musicians, I'm a big fan of. So
yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
My hot tub and some tequila, right? Yeah,
Very
probably
cool.
animal pleasures.
Yeah. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Other than buy Bitcoin, just keep doing what you're doing. You know, you're gonna figure it out.
Good. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
See, okay, I think it's probably more functional under, but it just looks better over. So it's that practicality versus aesthetic.
It's good. You really suss it out. The patent has it pictured going over. 80 to 90% people say over, but the people who say under have their reasons. So
Right. Yeah, I get it.
if a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of the head, what would the title be?
Oh man, it might be this quote from Moby Dick. It might be from Hell's Heart I stab at thee.
Nice. They want to scent the glue and the binding. What smell?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm gonna go with like sandalwood, something classy.
If a statue is built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Uh, I want it to be as vulgar as possible. So it's gonna be on the Vegas Strip, and it's gonna be 24 karat gold. Uh,
Dude, that is classic. I
I
love
want
it.
people to hate it.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I never had and never want. Probably obscene wealth. You know.
Yeah. Guess what? The three answers I get the most: fame, money, and heroin.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's fair. Those are all fair answers. Yeah.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Hold my breath and duck. What's the bag made of? Hold on.
No one's ever asked, what is the bag made of? Yeah, that's good. Well, being a literature person, you might get a kick out of this. I asked this woman on the Venice Boardwalk that question once, and she nailed it. She said, I would take the velocity of the bag of shit to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. And I'm like, dude, do you know that is Descent into the Maelstrom, the short story by Edgar Allan Poe, which
Yeah,
McLuhan quotes. He's like, if you study, he's being swooped down to his death in a whirlpool, of this boat being smushed by the ocean, and he studies the patterns of the broken parts and swoops his way out.
right. Yeah, no,
And
that's excellent. Yeah.
yeah, what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
You know, I've traveled abroad a couple of times, and I've come to terms with the fact that I am, a red-blooded American. Hence my statue in Vegas. And the one thing that irks me the most about this country is, I think, the working culture. How we're just kind of under the thumb, and I think the younger people I see all around me, at my work and everywhere, is they're kind of finally resisting that and saying,
Yeah,
no, like I'm not alive to come to work and listen to you. I'm here to pay my bills, and I love seeing that shift.
that's amazing because I don't ask this that often, but where'd you get your work ethic from?
Uh, I don't know, necessity. I think. Try.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, 90% of people say their parents.
yeah. I mean, they help,
And
but
yeah, but then if you look up work ethic in Wikipedia, about the third paragraph down, it goes, this could be a scam from consumer culture.
yeah, right. Yeah, really. Yeah.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Rights are what we derive from performing our responsibilities, I think.
Yeah. What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
how far you're willing to go.
Yeah. Well, re-evolution, the words in it, words evoke more in their meaning. It's re-evolving.
Yeah.
I see there's something wrong and here's a new plan. Rebellion is usually like, I just see there's something wrong.
Right. I'm pissed off. Right.
Yeah. Well, this socialist John Basil Barnhill said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. 2005 film V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on poverty or the war on terrorism, or the big one is the war on drugs? How can you have a war on drugs? Drugs don't fight. How can you say no to drugs? Drugs don't talk. So how do you personally handle false fears?
It's like you said, it's an oxymoron when we're fighting these intangibles, but it's the same way that we fight artistic ideas, right? But we usually fight those, with conversation and not planes. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of war in really any physical sense. So I think he's right to call that out.
Yeah. Yeah, my friend taught me two people talking is the revolution.
Right.
Conversation's the highest form of conflict resolution. But we tend to think conflict resolution is, oh, I've got to use military. No, you
Right.
don't.
Right.
Sit down and eat a pizza together.
Yeah, right. It's hard to, the one I remember, there's an old metal song, it's a lot harder to shoot a man once you've seen pictures of his kids.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, Eartha Kitt said, truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever. This is a question from Marcel Proust. On what occasion do you lie?
I consider myself a seeker of truth and an espouser of truth, but I think when I do lie, it's when it does not have far-reaching implications and to save the comfort of someone I love, right?
Yeah. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
What do I want to be when I grow up?
That is good. Very good, Deb. So how has the two things you pursued, like literature, and how has your calling in computer world shaped your behavior? First, how has literature shaped your behavior?
Well, I'm never bored. Well, that's not true, but I have. If my phone dies, I have a book with me. In the physical sense of it, but in the more, it's about having that rich tapestry. Putting the pieces together, and people who confine their education and entertainment to really narrow places. Maybe they get a better exposure to those pieces, but they just don't have as many. And you get to interface with so many more people when you have a broader tapestry, which is nice.
Yeah. And then how has developing software shaped your behavior?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you write software, you think about it in terms of languages, right? And it is almost kind of like learning another type of art or literature, and the people you interface through that are totally different than the people you'd normally see in, say, like academia or even at the library or what have you. So just the doors that it's opened to other people's lives, and their experiences.
This is Thornton Wilder in 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You laid your cards on the table for over 80 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this. What's it really all about for you?
think leaving something behind that helps people who have the same problems and questions that I do get a little bit closer to figuring it out for themselves.
Yeah, it's good. But there's a flip on that. Duchamp said there's no solution because there's no problem. How do you process that?
No, I mean it's like I said, we're all chasing our own tails on this side of thing, and then it doesn't mean they're not going to at least want to chew on it, And if I can sharpen their teeth a little, I'll take that.
Chew on it and sharpen the teeth. That's really McLuhan in a lot of ways. He said, "I'm not starting the fire. I'm just turning the alarm on."
Right.
It's good. What gives you the most optimism?
I think it's we mentioned the younger generation and seeing the good along with the bad and realizing there will always be good along with the bad. It's like a game of ping pong, right? It's going to go back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, being from the Midwest in Michigan, the killer thing about ping pong is when you play it in somebody's garage or basement, the ball always goes into some storage boxes.
Right. Yeah.
And then you got to dig it out.
Yeah, right.
You don't have any like ball girls or ball boys.
No, you got to take care of this, right?
You got to go dig it out of the box.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that answer the most. What gives you the most optimism is youth, the young. So it's really been a pleasure, Devin. I wanted to tell you the first question I asked is what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Sure.
And the last question is what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially because it was you. Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
For sure. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Devin.